Good evening, warriors. We're into chapter 3 of Warriors, Hard Chargers, and Patriots. Connecting the little dots to the big dots. The chapter's title is One Team, So Many Tribes. You're going to find out a lot about these tribes as this discussion goes on that makes this ship and air wing operate. It's truly a phenomenal experience to be on one of these ships. Certainly, as you listen, you can imagine how hard it is to get all the things done that need to be done for this type of vessel, this combat vessel. I wanted to read a piece that George Will had written many years ago, talking specifically about aircraft carriers, but it could apply to all of our ships, all of our squadrons, our special forces, every unit in the Navy as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of this piece of metal and the interaction it has with the people, an aircraft carrier is a perfect example from which he wrote this article. So if I might, most of us, most of the time, live in the blissful ignorance of what a small, elite, heroic group of Americans are doing for us night and day. As we speak, all over the globe, American sailors and submariners and aviators are doing something very dangerous. People say, well, it can't be too dangerous because there are no wrecks. But the reason we don't have accidents is that these are superb professionals. The fact that they master the dangers does not mean that the dangers are not real. Right now, somewhere around the world, young men and women are landing aircraft on pitching decks of aircraft carriers at night. You can't pay people to do that. They do it out of love, of country, of adventure, and of challenge. We all benefit from it, and the very fact that we don't have to think about it tells you how superbly they are doing their job. Living on the edge of danger, so the rest of us need not think about it, let alone experience the danger. Regarding that latter part, many of us go to bed tonight not thinking about the heroic actions that are going on in the Red Sea and surrounding areas on this night, previous nights, and many nights there hereafter. They are just doing professional work, hard work, and just gut-wrenching work and dangerous work. So our hats should be off to all of them. The second thing is we don't do it for the money. It's not about cash. It's about serving others. It's about the service piece. I would embarrass other CEOs of equal-sized companies, of maybe equal-sized numbers of people, if we compared our paychecks. But I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it for my sailors. I want to be with my sailors. They are the people, or the reason that I spent 30 years doing this job. So some of them are going to watch this, and I want to tell you right now. So let me tell you about the ship. 1,076 feet long, at the widest point of the beam, 258 feet wide. Its draft is 35 feet below the water's surface. She's got 4 main engines that are being fed from 2 nuclear reactors. Those 4 main engines can produce 260,000 shaft horsepower. They are attached to 4 screws. Each of those screws are 25 feet in diameter and weigh 66,000 pounds. Behind 2 of the inboard screws of the ship are 2 rudders. These rudders are each 258 square feet. That's the size of a typical bedroom in a house. Also, that this ship can travel well over 35 knots for extended periods of time because the ship is nuclear. The ship has 4 catapults to launch aircraft. It has 4 arresting gear wires and engines to help bring the aircraft safely on board and land them in a short distance. There are 4 aircraft elevators that travel between the flight deck and the hangar bay, usually about 47 aircraft or so on the flight deck, the rest of them down in the hangar bay, where the more significant maintenance is occurring under the protection of closed doors and better lighting. But maintenance is still occurring nonetheless on the flight deck as we turn aircraft around for the next launch and recovery cycle. We have 8 weapons elevators. I think it's 8, might be wrong by 1 or 2. But they're designed to bring the weapons up from the weapons storage spaces to the hangar bay and the flight deck, respectively, so that way it can be quickly loaded for the next takeoff cycle, the next set of missions. There's the landing area is about a 9-degree offset to the left of the center line of the ship. That's set up so that you can potentially and do land aircraft and launch aircraft at the same time. It is a very, very delicate balance, especially at night. So you've got to make sure that everyone on the flight deck have their heads on a swivel and are taking care of each other, because these aircraft have to be turned around to be ready to go on the next cycle, not the cycle they're in, but the next cycle, and that takes a lot of time. You have to do a little servicing, a little maintenance, a little fuel, weapons. There's a lot that's going on. So all of that has to occur. The catapults are designed to take the airplane up to flight speed within about 110, 150 feet. The arresting gear wires are about 20, maybe 40 feet apart from each other. So that's a fairly small landing area. You've got to catch one of those wires with a hook, or you're going to have to go around. And these aircraft, of course, are landing with very little fuel, so there's not a lot of room for error. They can certainly take off again without catching the hook and come around once or twice more before they have to go up to a tanker and get fuel. This airport is also not stable in terms of the fact that it's pitching and rolling. So you got a flight deck of about 700 feet long, and if you got about a 3 or 4 degree pitch, you take a sine of that angle and take it back 700 feet, you're going to find out that the ship could be pitching at the very stern of the ship 40 to 50 feet under the worst conditions. Well, that's not the worst conditions. It's probably as tough of a condition as you want to try to fly airplanes, especially at night. It's a risky job. Those aviators are just exceptional at what they do. And the flight deck crew, both the air wing side and the ship side, are working as a team to make sure everyone's okay and that the aircraft are ready to go. So that's what all the various piece parts that go into this. We talked about the reactors. They feed that steam to the engines, but they also feed it to desalinators. We make 400,000 gallons of water every day for the power plants and for the hotel. We call the building, the ship, if you want, is the hotel. So it's a powerful, awesome piece of material and piece of machinery. I wanted to talk to you about the people that make up the ship's crew in terms of the departments that we have. So there's a commanding officer, an executive officer. There's sort of the president and vice president, if you will. The command master chief is a senior enlisted advisor, been in the Navy for a long time, seen a lot of things. He's not only a warrior, but he's a wizard. All three of these people so far. Most of the people that I have the pleasure of working with are warriors and wizards. Most of them. So that's the way it is. You have department heads who are captains and Navy commanders. I should say that the Air Wing commander, who basically has control of and owns the squadrons on the ship, is also a Navy captain. Tremendous amount of responsibility, tremendous amount of concerns and about all the various things that could go wrong. But he's got great commanding officers on his squadrons, and they are working daily with him and his staff to make sure that their squadrons are as ready as they can be. So let me just give you an idea of what the various departments on the ship are all about. The deck department does all the seamanship things. They are the functions and evolutions. They do they set up for anchorages, and they control the anchor. They do dockings. They'll do moorings. They do ship refuelings alongside. They're the masters at making sure all of the various equipment is up and operating and hooked up properly. They transfer cargo, and they work the search and rescue teams off of small deployable rib boats. That's a dangerous job, launching in the middle of the night, coming from an alert status and zipping around trying to find somebody that might potentially be in the water. We have a dental department. We have an engineering department, non-nuclear and nuclear. The non-nuclear controls all of the equipment that's not directly connected to the reactor. All those weapons elevators, all the other elevators, the electrical materials that are going on. They do a tremendous amount of welding, a lot of metalsmith work, and basically control all of the hardware pieces of the ship. Tremendous amount of responsibility there. We have a legal department. You know, we have maritime law concerns, and we also have our own legal internal discipline issues that have to be addressed while we're at sea. And we've got lawyers and their staff keeping us out of trouble to make sure we do the right things. We have a navigation department. They're a signalman. They are basically keeping us in safe water so that when we launch aircraft and or we're navigating from point A to point B, that we don't put ourselves into somebody's sea space or controlled sea space, so that territorial waters. And so that's a tough job. They do all the navigating coming in and out of ports. They do all of the preparatory work when we're going into anchorages, busy anchorages like Singapore and Hong Kong. And so those are pretty busy places to go. And the navigator spends most of his life up on the bridge. The operations department has a strike ops group, an air ops group. They have an intel piece. They're a combat element as well. And of course, they run our weather folks as well. And they do all the coordination between the air wing and the ship to make sure the schedules are right. We got the right numbers of airplanes. We've got the cycle set up so that we're not being too rushed about this. And it's a constant interaction between the operations officer, who in my case was the Navy commander, and CAG, and the Air Wing commander and his staff. The reactor spaces. I mean, probably they're all hardworking people. But they've got a lot of responsibility. This is an area where you can't go wrong. It's often said that, you know, we can't afford to have one nuclear incident on a Navy ship, because if we do, it will cease to exist or cease to operate as we used to operate. I mean, we don't have, you know, the keys are guarded. People are watching what we're doing. And we're aware of it, and we train incessantly. We train at night when the flight ops are over. We train during the day. We have numerous exercises, numerous drills that include all of the ship and make sure that we're ready to operate those reactors like sports cars, which is not the way a traditional nuclear reactor would be operated. We've got an admin department. Near and dear to my heart, because they control a lot of the educational services, public affairs, which is a big part of what we do, and our career information group. The aircraft intermediate maintenance department works on all the equipment that services engines and hardware, radar, and we keep up the equipment so that the ship and the air wing together can make sure that all of the systems on these aircraft are up, ready to go, and that's a 24/7 job. There's a lot of work that goes into this. The air department, they've got people doing just about everything. They wear colored jerseys for the most part. Gives the air boss, who sits up in his own tower, he basically controls the airspace around the ship for 5 miles. And he also owns the flight deck, and he also owns the hangar bay. So he's got yellow shirts, blue shirts, red shirts, green shirts, purple shirts, white shirts, a variety of different people. There's fuel people, there's safety people, there are directors, there are people that run with chocks and chains to make sure the aircraft are secured as soon as they can be. And there are a host of other activities going on that flight deck as well. There's a crash crew to make sure that, you know, should we have an accident, that we are putting people out in harm's way to make sure that we minimize whatever damage may occur should we have a failure of a main mount, or should somebody make a hard landing, what have you. There are 1,000 different things that could happen there. There's the chaplain department. I'm going to come back to the chaplains department because I got a lot of good guides from my chaplains. They were able to correlate biblical passages to how I should lead. You'd be surprised how relevant they are, and we're going to talk about that at a later time. We have the combat systems department. They're in charge of all the equipment that feeds our radars, our intel work, our weapons systems that are defending the ship. And so they've got a bunch of people that are monitoring radars, watching and over the automated systems that we have, making sure that if they have to, they can go manual on them, because sometimes that's the way it is. We have a supply department. The supply department is in charge of all parts going on and off the ship for both the ship and the air wing. They have 6 galleys where they cook 20,000 meals a day. This is not a trivial pursuit. This is hard work. They run the ship's laundry, which I've talked about before, from a quality of life perspective. They run the hotel services so that people, when they get done with a hard day, when they go back to their berthing compartment, things are working right, and they've got clean sheets and all the other things that go along with what you expect out of a hotel. We have a training department that provides ship-wide training in ship and dock related to the Navy, related to the ship. It helps us keep people attuned to what's going on our ship. And when they check on board, they're well taken care of. I'm going to defer for a moment to the first 72 hours. There's a video that used to be out. I don't even know if we use it anymore. But the context is applicable both in the Navy and in civilian world. And that is that basically the first 72 hours sets your impression of where of that ship or that company or wherever it is. And if it's not a good impression, it takes a long time, some time anyway, to make sure that we can turn that impression around. Now, I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really poorly. And I'm hoping that we come back and talk about this as well, because it takes its own separate entity to talk about the care and feeding of our young people and those first impressions. The weapons department, they're basically, like I said before, in charge of the safety, the handling, the build-up of the various weapons, and the transport of them from the weapons storage areas well down in the bowels of the ship up to either the flight deck or the hangar bay. And I'd be remiss if I didn't once again talk about the air wing, because without the air wing, you know, we're nobody. We don't have any reason to exist without the air wing. So I want to talk about the transparency that comes out of these various departments. You know, I've had my own experiences in the corporate world where you'll have departments and they are so stovepiped and so locked in place that for some sort of piece of information or a request for help, it has to go up to the top of that stovepipe and then back down to the other. It's happened to me just in the last couple of weeks here at some utility companies. I can't get the engineering people to talk to the operations people, and it's taken 6 months for what should take maybe a day or a day and a half. So we have a unique entity on these ships. It's called 8 o'clocks. Now, I'm a ROTC guy. I'm sure that there's a lot of history behind 8 o'clocks, but I'm going to be honest with you. The 8 o'clocks were every night at 6 o'clock. And so I really couldn't correlate as to how this went down, but anyway, they're called 8 o'clocks. And they're run by the executive officer and the command master chief and every one of those department heads. And intentionally, the commanding officer, I mean, once in a while I'd ask if I could come down, but really, this is the time when they rolled up their sleeves, were allowed to get angry with each other, frustrated with each other, ask blunt questions to each other if they had to, so that they could work out all of those wrinkles and come out of the meeting as one team, one fight. So they knew what the objectives were for the next day. They knew how that day went, and they knew that what didn't go well. They knew if they needed help, this was the place to ask for it. And they knew that the XO was going to make sure that all the right resources, along with the command master chief, were employed so that this ship and this air wing could do their thing and do it well. I wish that in the companies that I worked in, when I got out of the Navy, I wish we had something like 8 o'clocks. I mean, it didn't exist. And so, and I think the lack of transparency and the lack of frequent attention to the challenges and not allowing them to become anything bigger than maybe an embering bush by an out-of-control forest fire is a pivotal thing to making a high-performance organization work. These ships run for about 25 years before they have to get refueled. Those reactors that I alluded to will fuel my hometown of Fargo, North Dakota, for 25 years as well. I mean, there's an equivalence there. After 25 years, the ship comes in for an overhaul, gets a new load of fuel and new rods of uranium, and is good for another 25 to 27 years. So she is scheduled to be refueled once during the life of her ship. Vincent was refueled, I think, about 5 years ago. This is the ship. You know, And in many ways, I was the ship. When I embarked or debarked the ship over the loudspeaker system, everyone could hear Carl Vinson arriving, Carl Vinson departing. So it always reminded me, gave me connection to the ship and who Carl Vinson was. And we used that collectively because for me, it wasn't I was the ship. It was we were the ship. All of us were the ship. It took every one of us to be of like mind, like action, or we would just not be at 100%, and we had to be at 100%. So I wanted everyone to have that same level of pride. So we connected ourselves to Milledgeville, Georgia, where Carl Vinson was from, and where he grew up as a young man and started serving in Congress. And we went and visited Milledgeville, Georgia. We had a group of folks come out for the change of command when I took over and when I left. And a lot of those folks were friends of Carl Vinson as he grew up. So these were older people, but they had an attachment to the ship as much as we had an attachment to Milledgeville. It was a powerful thing. They, at Georgia State College, the chancellor was a dear friend. And she set up the first ever long distance training program. We didn't have the bandwidth in those days to do the things. We basically had to sort of steal some bandwidth to get this done. And the way we did it, and we set up a master's in public administration program on the ship. So they agreed to change and move their class start times and end times so that it would always start at 5 o'clock wherever we were at. There were times when the kids at Georgia State would be in the classroom at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, there was a tremendous interchange there. We got through the coursework, and that was all wonderful and fine. But at the end, they would ask questions, what these young men and women did, and there was a great 20 minutes of additional dialogue that went on. A lot of learning going on from both sides of that. I went back to Milledgeville on several occasions, and in one particular instance, and this is really important, I think. I love just talking to people and telling them what the Navy is about. I'd take briefs back there, PowerPoint presentations. I'd talk about these great young men and women that were Navy sailors. And one day I was asked if I would go to this veterans home and talk to some of the folks that are residing in the veterans home. And there's a Carl Vinson wing to this veterans home. And when I got there, I was in my dress whites, not my dress whites, pardon me, my summer whites. And there were maybe 15, 20, 30 people, in various groups. And then most of them were in wheelchairs or sitting in chairs. A couple were actually lying down in beds with their heads propped up. And we just had a conversation. They would ask me some blunt questions about whatever it was that they wanted to ask me. And every one of them, man, I just had to go up, give them a hug and shake their hand and thank them for what they did for this country. But in one particular instance, I had this man who would not look at me. He was in a wheelchair. He would look at the ground. I could not elicit a stare or a smile or any kind of emotion from this man. And I was doing everything I could. I was trying to raise his emotions to mine, which were just about at the level of tears. So I leaned over and asked the nurse, what's going on here? Well, this gentleman was a B-17 pilot in World War II. He'd flown 46 missions as a pilot, was scheduled to go home, and then they rotated him back in because they had a shortage of pilots. And then, was rescued after he had to bail, the crew had to bail over Germany towards the end of the war. So, awarded several high-level awards, put his life on the line for all of us. I went over and got down on my knees so I could make eye contact with him. And I told him this: you are why we serve. You are the reason. You give us the lift. We don't want to let people like you down. We don't have that background of service that you can provide yet. And you should be so proud. And when I go back, I'm going to tell everybody about you. And you're going to hear from them, I guarantee you. And so we went back and had a conversation. And over the next 3 or 4 months, sailors were writing letters back to all of these people, but in particular, this one warrior, who in his own right, according to the nurses, got over 500 letters. There were probably 3,000 letters sent back to the veterans home at large. And we stayed connected. Young men, young women, trying to find out who they are now introduced to people who they should want to be. That's it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so pumped right now. I have one more thing I want to talk about, and it'll take 3 minutes. The commanding officer of Carl Vinson, who was commanding officer Carl Vinson about 9 months ago, allowed me to come out for an overnight. I wanted to go out and touch sailors. And it was something like this. I said, hey, just give me, you don't have to give me a place to sleep. You don't need to give me a bed. You just let me ramble and let me go talk to young men and women. And I know where I can't go. I know where I can go. And he was so kind and let me do this. And so I was on board for 30 hours. According to my little watch here with the little the step counter, I walked 47,636 steps. I took 200 pictures. And of those pictures, most of them were sent to family members so that they could know that their son or daughter were appreciated and here's what they were doing. Because a lot of times these young sailors don't tell their moms and dads what they're doing. So it was it just recharged me. American sailors are so great. And I hope that all ships follow this perfect example of connecting with whoever it is, whatever entity, whatever town or state or community that might be associated with the ship, and going back and telling the stories of their heroic people, and so that we can connect these two. That's it. Love you all. We're off and marching. A lot more coming. Stay safe tonight, and think of all those young men and women tonight on the wall, and pray for them. Please pray for them. Thank you. Good night.